I got started with this particular line of work way back in the 80s, and it has continued. This report that I'm going to talk about today is actually the third in a biannual series that I had been doing as part of the CISQ effort. So this particular talk, I'm going to turn the topic more towards solutions than the problem than I have in the previous incarnations of this report. So if you do see the report as a result of listening to my talk, you will find well over 100 embedded links in the report that take you to some of the actual sources of the data that I derived from to put my report and this presentation together. So would encourage you to all do that. And here's the web page where you can actually find the report on the CISQ web page, and I'm pretty sure the previous two reports are out there as well. Okay, so Julia mentioned my background. I look back over what I had been doing in this area, and at the first time I published a paper on this particular subject of the cost of poor quality was about 25 years ago. It was actually 1998, and it's amazing that this topic still lives after all these years. Anyway, so the motto that I use around here at Krasner Consulting is something I stole from Phil Crosby. Software quality is not free, but it's cheaper than the alternative. And I like to think that when we talk about this subject. Okay, the report that I'm going to talk about today has gotten a lot of attention. The previous report got a lot of attention as well, but this incarnation seemed to have gotten even more attention so far. And this is data. I haven't updated this since March, so I know that there are millions of media mentions of this report all over the place, and so a lot of them were at the end of last year when the report actually got published. So I wrote this report last November, and a lot of the data has been superseded, I would suppose, by more recent events. So I'll try to bring some of that in. Most interestingly, this time around, not only did we have my report translated into Japanese for the Japanese audience, but it was also translated into Spanish for all the Spanish-speaking people that are out there. So I know that the report has proliferated significantly, and I still get lots of reactions to it. But anyway, so it got a lot of interest, and still does, and it's probably because I'm actually talking about dollars and cents. So the reason that this work started was when we went back to look at what are the actual costs of poor quality software in the United States and the world today. What we found was that they sort of behave according to this iceberg model that I created, where what we actually typically see in terms of those costs above the waterline are these things like stock loss, service outages, customer problem reports, et cetera, et cetera. But most of the costs are actually hidden below the waterline and are typically not seen. And they're certainly more often than not seen even within an organization, from the bottom to the top. And we certainly don't see these, in the public, which of course is a challenge when you're trying to draw empirical data across a wide spectrum of industry. So, I mean, the original purpose of the series of reports was basically to inform and inspire the readers to go out and seek this knowledge within their own organizations. And I learned this the hard way early on in my career when I started working with big companies like Lockheed, that you start asking questions about this kind of data, and you find out they look at you and they go, huh? And so it's not routinely the sort of thing that gets collected. And so what I was seeking initially was a first order approximation of just how big this problem was. And I was able to get my hands on some, data, but really there isn't a whole lot of data out there to draw from. So that's been the whole purpose, was to expose these hidden costs of poor software quality that are typically not seen within an organization or outside of an organization. Okay, so let me hit the highlights of the actual numbers. And just for context sake, I would tell you that the GDP in 2022, for comparison, was about $23.3 trillion. And the US labor base for IT jobs in 2022 was about $1.51 trillion. So what I'm going to show you, you can kind of compare that to those numbers, which sort of characterize the entire, United States industrial complex. Okay, so, all right, what's going on here? All right, and it was also the case in the IT labor base at the end of 2022 that there was roughly a shortage of 300,000 IT jobs in the United States that was basically exacerbating the problems. Okay, so the number that I came up with, and as I say, you can follow the sources in the report, but the total cost of poor software quality in the United States in the year 2022, I estimate to be $2.41 trillion. All right, and that's a big number, especially when you can compare it to the GDP. So we're looking at something that's over 10% of US GDP as the total cost of software quality, and nobody knows that. And in addition to that, there's all this technical debt sitting out there. And I was able to estimate that at about $1.52 trillion in the United States in 2022. So a couple of very big numbers. When you start to break that down, these numbers have risen significantly over the last 2 years since the previous report that I did. So we're seeing, a rapid increase in these kinds of costs. The biggest, of course, as usual, is in the area of operational failures, where we saw about $1.81 trillion in 2022. Cybersecurity was a big chunk of that and continues to be even a bigger chunk of that. So $1.44 trillion in cybersecurity failures, and that in and of itself that number has been going up at about 45% per year. So I think you can expect to see a much larger number on that in the coming years. Okay, in the area of legacy systems, all those legacy systems that you have to keep feeding and keep the lights on with. We saw about $520 billion, not a whole lot different than 2 years ago. And here was an interesting little fact that I found in a study that a recent survey of 250 IT professionals stated that the majority of application modernization projects fail at an average cost of $1.5 million and 16 months of wasted time. So much for modernization of IT systems. Still a problem. Okay, unsuccessful projects at about $260 billion. And the rate of, the relative rate of success hasn't changed a whole lot in the last 10 years. And basically, you can expect a 30% success rate for our new software development projects across industry. And we can talk some more about that if you want. Okay, so underneath all of this stuff is another hidden process that we like to talk about, which is the process of finding and fixing defects. And I've estimated that to be at about $607 billion in 2022. Okay, and there's the 2020 numbers so that you can compare. Okay, so the report, as I told you, focuses on a couple of problem areas that I saw as the big ones, and then turns and looks at some of these potential solution areas. So we're going to talk about cybercrime, which you saw was a big one, and the costs of software failure because of cybercrime went up some 64% in 2021 and 42% in 2022. And forecasted to reach $8 trillion in this year, 2023. So it's a big area and it's getting bigger. We also looked at the area of open source software, which at the time was eating the world. And we saw that the failures due to open source software, which is prevalent in most systems, those deficiencies rose 650% in 2021 alone. So we'll talk more about open source because it's a huge problem. All right, and then technical debt is still the largest obstacle to changing any existing code, and we see that over and over again. This is probably no surprise to any of you. Okay. All right. So turning our attention then we're going to talk about these three problem areas and look at the numbers there. And then we're going to turn our attention to three solution areas that I see as the most important emerging areas. The first one I know you'll be interested in is software quality standards and models. So we're going to talk about that one. And then we're going to look at the new set of deficiency, exposure, and remediation tools that are starting to populate the world of software development. And then, AI machine learning tools for software quality engineering. So not generating code, but fixing code, if you will. Okay. All right. So in the area of operational failures, we started off 2022 with this SolarWinds problem. I know you're all familiar with this. I don't have to go into it, but in terms of money, I don't know if you had ever known that $5 billion in market cap were lost by SolarWinds, and each customer of SolarWinds lost about $12 million on average because of that software flaw. And then slightly later in the year, Log4j came in, and that was huge. It's because all the Java programs that we have out there all use the Log4j software, and then that morphed into Log4Shell and caused more problems. Okay, and then a little bit later in the year, Colonial Pipeline came about, and everybody on the East Coast lost access to gasoline, and that that was a huge problem. And they at peak were losing 100 million gallons of fuel per day for that 1 week. Okay, and here's some more, and these failure stories, these are all described in detail in my report. So you can go look at these. The ones down here on the bottom in red, those are ones that have come along, significant ones have come along since I published the report. So lots of failure stories. Some of them, most of them probably don't share, the costs. So you have to dig to find that kind of information, but it is out there if you look real hard. Okay, WordPress bug, that was another popular one. Okay, so if we take a look and see some of the data that's out there, it turns out that the FBI has a branch you may know about, IC3, which collects data on cybercrime reports. And what we're seeing here are all those reports that are sent to the FBI, which means that most of the reports that don't get sent to the FBI are not included in what I'm showing you. But the main point of the story, is that the number of complaints is rising rapidly over the last 12 years, and the total losses on a per year basis are also rising rapidly, up to about over $10 billion in 2022. Okay, and ransomware is a big one, but only about 20% of those actually get reported. Cyber attacks were up 38% in 2022, and I think you're all aware of this: ransomware, cryptojacking, deepfakes, blah blah blah. These are the hottest cyber crimes and still are. Okay, in the first half of 2022 alone, more than 236 million ransomware attacks were reported across the globe. So not only is ransomware prevalent, but now ransomware as a service is even more prevalent. Okay, payments also for ransomware attacks have skyrocketed. So in the last couple of years, you can see here by this chart just how much that they have seemingly gone up. Okay, And in terms of software organizations dealing with these, okay, for example, in the area of data breaches, it was reported by IBM that it takes the average organization 277 days to fully identify and contain a data breach, with an average cost up to $4.24 million. So that's another interesting piece of information I thought you'd like to see. And then more recently, oh, I thought I got rid of him. Well, doggone it. All right. And then more recently, and a good example of the crypto world was this report, which was just earlier this week. More than 125 million taken from the crypto platform multi-chain. Well, you know, so much for the security of blockchain technology, right? Okay, well, here, this is my own wanted poster that I put together on this guy, who turns out to be a central player behind several of these developments. And I thought he deserved a $10 million reward. So if you do see him, let me know. In terms of, you know, what are the different areas of cybercrime and how much is being lost by each victim? Well, here are the different types and their breakdown. I'm not going to dwell on this. You can find this report. Okay. And here's some of the top variants, the top ransomware variants that were victimizing critical infrastructure in 2022. And somewhere in here near the end of the year, Fortras file transfer tool, Go Anywhere, jumped in here and made its way into the top 4. Okay, the government is obviously concerned about this problem, and they have now changed their strategy about how to deal with this by placing the burden on software makers and infrastructure owners. So if you're in that business of providing software systems to critical infrastructure, you're going to get hit with some new requirements. Okay. And here's a couple of interesting little things. Did you know that your company's credit rating goes down when your cybersecurity risk goes up? Your CEO may know that, perhaps. Okay, here's some data about the cost of a data breach from the insurance industry perspective, because that's really where a bunch of these numbers are starting to come from, you know, as people try to insure themselves against cyber attacks and data breaches and so forth. These are getting rolled into insurance premiums, and your insurance premiums, in fact, do go up, you know, when you've had a cyber attack. So, and the things that are covered by insurance are not these. Okay, so the cyber insurance that people are selling these days really only worry about the breach and containment costs and the regulatory fines, but not about, you know, how much you lose in the market cap. Okay, open source. All right, this is a huge issue. Nobody really knows. Well, many people don't know how much open source software is actually contained within their systems. And so there have been some studies about that. I mean, basically, all companies that pretty much use open source, whether they know it or not, we learned that a medium-sized application, something on the order of slightly less than 1 million lines of code, contains 200 to 300 third-party components on average. 80% of organizations reported an increase in their use of open source, and roughly 68 to 75% reported that they had a vulnerability had gotten them in the last couple of years. But only 46% of organizations are performing security scans to detect that. Not good. And here are some of the most critical and high vulnerabilities in open source software. And these have been around for a while. These are not new things. All of you, I'm sure, recognize this. But I mean, the you know, open source is a reality. I mean, software developers these days cannot meet the demand for the software functionality that's required without incorporating, quote, reusable components, and many of them in the world of open source. But unfortunately, they operate under the assumption that these open source components are of high quality, and they're not. Okay, so Synopsys, who was one of the sponsors of my report, you know, did some in-depth studying of open source software. So by various industries, how much of your code base is made up of open source software? And so we get these kinds of interesting profiles of different industry sectors and how much is based on open source. So as you would expect in the wonderful world of the Internet of Things, you can see that over 90% of the code is open source. Okay, and also in the area of cybersecurity for interesting. All right, so lots of interesting stuff here. Okay, and these were the results from Synopsys auditing of 2,409 code bases in 2021. And they found that 97% of those code bases contained open source components. 85% of those components were out of date, 4 years out of date or more. More than 80% contained at least one vulnerability, and 50% of those were high risk vulnerabilities. And here's some of the most popular vulnerable components that were found by Synopsys. So jQuery was right up on top. Okay, they also looked at the percentage of those code bases with unpatched high severity bugs. All right, and they found this interesting thing. So as a percentage of code bases with unpatched high severity vulnerabilities, okay, so Internet of Things, as you would expect as before, but there was a couple of surprises in this list. At least I found them to be quite surprising and a little bit disturbing. For example, in the area of aviation, aerospace, automotive, and transportation, look at the percentage of code bases with unpatched high severity vulnerabilities. Oh boy, okay, there's not much that depends on software in those areas, is there? Okay, so that was a bit worrisome to me. All right, so now we'll switch to the third area of technical debt. So as you know, I think you all know, this audience should well know what technical debt is, so I don't have to define it. Okay, what we've estimated is that the technical debt is somewhere between 20 and 40% of the total value of an organization's technology estate before depreciation, so quite a bit. 78% of organizations have more technical debt in the past year than previous, but only 42% of those companies feel that they have the ability to assess that technical debt. 87% of global CIOs admitted that the complexity of their systems prevents them from investing in the next generation. My question, what are they doing about it? Okay, the number of hours an average developer spends on addressing technical debt is 13.5 out of 41.1 in a week, or roughly 33% of their time on average. Okay, the research indicates that 70% of development teams always or frequently skip security steps due to time pressures. Technical debt is going to get much worse. It is getting much worse. So perhaps it's time to rethink the idea of quick and dirty and build refactoring into your software development lifecycle. This is not a surprise to you guys, right? I think what happened is that Agile went too far, in my mind. Okay, here's a good example of it's very unusual when technical debt emerges into the public consciousness, but here's a case where it actually did, and it happened to Southwest Airlines. Okay, it happened to Southwest Airlines in late December. So they canceled 17,000 flights in late December due to technical debt in their aging crew scheduling system. They lost track of all their crews. They knew where the planes were, but they didn't know where the crews were. All right, and so 1 million plus passengers got stranded over about a week's period. $1.1 billion in direct costs were lost, and $4 billion in market cap was lost that month. And they're going to spend over $1 billion trying to fix those problems, okay, in their systems this year. Now that is an unusual example of technical debt changing over into real cost of poor quality. You don't usually see that. Okay, so how does technical debt accumulate? I'm probably preaching to the choir with this one. I think you know that in the more common agile DevOps continuous the CI/CD processes, that deficiencies do get introduced because of shortcuts, and the more sprints you have, the more likely that more deficiencies are going to be introduced, until finally you get to the point where quality and productivity has dropped way down, and business risk and cost and speed to market have gone way up. Again, no surprise to you guys, you know all this stuff. Okay, so I guess the best we can do about looking at the value of refactoring in your life cycle is this study that was done by Microsoft, where they actually studied the benefits of refactoring by percentage gains. And so here are all of the gains that they saw, by implementing refactoring as a part of their development lifecycle. And one of the ones that you might not realize was this one on the bottom: reduced time to market. Okay, so I think we all know that we as professionals, I know we know that better quality leads to faster time to market, because if you've got lousy quality, you spend all of your time trying to test out all the bugs at the end of the development cycle. Well, then you're not going to get to market on time. And I think Microsoft continues to demonstrate and prove that. Okay. So I think there's some fairly lessons. Step Size was another company that actually studied the problem, and they found that organizations who actively manage technical debt can ship at least 50% faster. So again, that's a correlation which is probably not widely understood. Okay, so I think we've hit the highlights here on the problem areas, and so now what we need to do is shift our attention to the solution areas in the time we have left. Okay, so let's talk about software quality standards. And I think you all know that if there was a simple measure, we'd all be using it and everybody would demand it, but it's not like that. And so what we need to do is look at the emerging frameworks that are available. And so the new ISO 25000 series, breaking quality down into its main ilities, that kind of factor model has been around way back, Barry Boehm and way before that. But precisely defining these characteristics in such a way as to make them operational and useful and perhaps measurable, that's a whole nother thing. So they take it to the level, all right, where they try to come up with measurements, and that's basically what led us at CISQ to ISO 5055, okay, which actually created source code level measures for 4 out of those 8 quality characteristics. So reliability, performance, efficiency, security, and maintainability are all measurable characteristics of software quality. You don't have to rely on humans, and extensive testing. I mean, these are measurable within the code, and those have become standard, and we should be using those for sure. Okay, and these measures are tied to the CWE taxonomy, which is well known, well understood. If you haven't ever seen it, I'll show it to you in a second. But the common weakness enumeration technology taxonomy that's maintained by MITRE, pretty well known and pretty well described. So we've got a very precise description of most of the known software weaknesses and vulnerabilities that are out there to leverage from, and ISO 5055 does exactly that. Okay, and then the nice thing is that a lot of these measurable characteristics are now being implemented in the tools that are becoming available to us, so that it's all entirely automated. Okay, so that's an additional good thing. So this area is maturing very quickly. I'm hoping that we start attacking the other 4 quality characteristics. Maybe they won't yield quite so well to code level measurements, but there should be ways to measure them in some way. In any case, we take the burden off of, we automate the measurement of these, which gives you more time to do the others. Okay, so in terms of the CWE framework, if you're not familiar with it, you can go to the MITRE.org website and see about all this. Basically, the attacks and failures on software are characterized into weaknesses and vulnerabilities underneath all those weaknesses, and they're well defined. And in fact, for example, here MITRE publishes every year the top 25 of those common weaknesses, and here are the top 25 from last year. They rank them, they score them as to how prevalent they are and how dangerous they are, and they track the change from year to year. And so here's what you're looking at what was considered to be the top 25. Now, I like this set a lot better than I like, for example, the OWASP top 10. Okay, this is more inclusive, and this is better grounded in a wide variety of systems. So this is a good thing to leverage from, again, because you've got a precise description of each of the weaknesses as a pattern that can be detected in code. Okay, well, unfortunately, I also discovered this little gem. Only 29% of 1,200 developers that were surveyed believe that the active practice of writing code free of vulnerabilities should be prioritized. And my question is, why? I don't get that, okay? And so maybe I don't know exactly what to say about that, but perhaps the Software Excellence Academy has something to say about that basic problem that needs an attitude adjustment. Okay. All right, so since we're all process people, let's talk about the process of understanding, finding, and fixing bugs. Now, a lot of this dates back to the original work I did in the early 80s at the MCC on the empirical studies of software engineering. And so looking at the actual processes rather than the way that we formulate our life cycles from concepts and so forth. So it turns out that a significant percentage of a project's cost today is not spent in the activity of construction, but in the corrective activity of finding and fixing defects. So let's take a look at that process. And here's actually what it looks like. This is the best characterization that I've come up with to date. Okay, and what I tried to do here is lay out the process from the point in time where a problem is found, okay, and it's recorded and prioritized through the process of understanding it and replicating it and finding out the root cause and developing a fix and trying to break the fix and proving that it works. And then, of course, the iterative process of repeating those steps over and over again until you get it right, and so on and so forth. And so what I've done, and this is, again, back to my empirical studies, is I put some dollar signs up here to indicate where most of the effort is. And so those are the areas that we need to focus our attention on: understanding, replicating and creating the test case, determining the root cause. These are the major areas of finding and fixing bugs that take up most of the time, where all of this 50% of the project's cost is being spent. Okay, and so that really that pinpoints it. That's where we need help. Okay, which brings us to the idea, well, okay, how do I look? And so what we're seeing right now in the industry is we're seeing a lot of bug bounty hunter programs. These are getting much popular, and you could actually make some money doing this stuff. So, Google, for example, paid this guy $107,500 for finding a security issue in their Google Home smart speakers. Okay, there's Hack the Pentagon, and then there's people asking OpenAI asking for people to help debug ChatGPT on BugCrowd at $20K a pop for every bug that you find. All right, there's also a new set of code analysis tools, for example, the CAST software system, automated program repair tools, and now we have a new generation of context-sensitive debugging tools. And so let me give you an example from Undo, who actually was, working with me or helping me on this this cost of quality study. They were one of the sponsors. So they did a survey of the people who use their time travel debugging tools. And so they asked, well, how much time does it save you? And they got these interesting results. At least this was at the time that the report was written. We only had a sample of 43 software engineers. So I'm not really sure how much farther they've gotten with this, but it's significant. Okay, AI. Once again, AI appropriately focused is going to be a big help here, because remember, if you will, that when software developers are trying to deal with code, that they spend the bulk of their time trying to understand what that code is, especially if they didn't write it, or even if they wrote it a couple of years ago, it doesn't matter. Still having to understand it is the bulk of the time that they spend. And so that's where we need to focus our attention on tooling and support, on understanding the code. Okay, and so the new tools that are coming out who are starting to look at basically at it from this perspective, and actually providing value, are these kinds of tools. So GitHub Copilot, Microsoft Bug Lab, Amazon Code Whisperer, Getafix, Kite, VS IntelliCode, Deep Code AI. These are all some of the new tools that are coming out that are using AI machine learning to attack this problem here of understanding the code and then being able to deal with it from there. Okay, just in the area of test automation, Micro Focus determined that they saw a 70% reduction in maintenance costs using AI and test automation, a 3x increase in test development speed, a 30% increase in automated test coverage, all significant benefits of using AI in just the test automation area. Okay, so stepping back now from those specific areas, when I look at the report that I did, and actually the series of reports that I did, I had come up with a set of broad recommendations for organizations that they could do something proactively about. And the whole thing has to start up at the top and work its way down, if you will. So up in the C-suite, and this is one of the biggest problems that I've tackled over my career as a consultant to industrial organizations, is this right here, establishing quality as a first-class citizen. And that's always been a problem. Okay, and it's been a problem because in the trade-off, between cost, schedule, and quality, cost and schedule are so easy to measure that quality always suffers. So that's one of the challenges of making it a first-class citizen. But basically, what I tell the CEOs and CIOs that I work with is they need to ask better questions. And sometimes I have to give them the questions. And that's okay. All right. And I need to tell them to measure software quality and the cost of poor quality in their organization. It is measurable, and anybody who tells you it's not is full of beans. Okay, at the level of organizations, I advise that they proactively address the flaws and vulnerabilities that lead to failures and significantly reduce the burden of their existing technical debt. Within the teams and the projects that they do, strive for high performance, use best practices and tools, define and track quality objectives and measure against them, avoid arbitrary and unrealistic schedules or constraints, and even down at the individuals, for those of you who are PSP folks, I think this will be obvious to you. Learn and grow, a disciplined approach, be a software engineer. Don't be afraid of quality or cost of quality metrics. Use existing knowledge sources of bug patterns and structural quality flaws that we find, for example, in the CWE, CVE. Okay, and so from the top down and maybe from the bottom back up, these are the basic recommendations that have come out of my series of reports. Okay, and so it's a holistic organization approach. And so at that point, I needed some concept to unify all these recommendations that I could show and say, hey, this is what I mean. Okay, and so the concept is that I have been articulating is something called DevQualOps. And here's what DevQualOps looks like. It's basically looks like the normal DevOps cycle, except that we add to this the idea of continuous quality engineering. So into the cycle, not only the normal gating, but the instrumentation and the automation and whatever it is that we need to do to build continuous quality engineering into this process. Okay, and so this is the idea of DevQualOps. It looks a lot like DevSecOps, if you will, except that it's broader now than just security. All right, and the nice thing is that the practices and tools that support this model are now coming into existence. And now I'm not talking about the old IDEs, I'm talking about the new stuff. Okay, which brings me to the subject of talking about tools. I can't avoid that. So the problem right now is that there are more tools out there than you can shake a stick at. Okay, and many of them around, this concept of DevOps. You got all these tools out there. Okay, all these tools. And are these the ones that I'm talking about? No. I'm talking about the new suite of tools that are not these tools. I'm talking about these tools. Okay, these are the ones that are emerging that are supporting the DevQualOps concept, whether they explicitly say so or not. But these are the things that you should start looking at, and everybody should be using GitHub Copilot by this point. If you're not using that, then there's something wrong, because that's a freebie, as I remember. So anyway, in terms of tools, lots of tools to choose from. I know you've already got a ton of tools in your own development environments, but start looking at these tools. Okay, start looking at these tools, because this is where the real help is going to come from, in my humble opinion. Okay, here's another interesting thing to look at. So Micro Focus did a study of the state of software quality, and they were looking at best practices and the difference between three groups of organizations: those who are considered quality leaders, those who are considered quality laggards, and those who are considered to be in the mainstream with regard to these best practices for software quality. And I found a couple of very interesting things in this data that I'd like to point out to you. So most of the things that you would expect are here, okay? But specifically, let's take a look at this one, the adoption of quality standards. Okay, so the leaders and the mainstreamers are doing pretty well. And this is where the ISO 25000 series comes in. They're doing pretty well, but the laggards, yeah, not so well. Okay, but the one which is really striking, and the one I keep reminding you of, is this one right down here. All right, senior management has played a positive role at instilling a quality culture in our enterprise, a very key best practice for software quality. Okay, and sure, the leaders are doing well, okay, but the laggards and the mainstreamers are not doing so well at all. And I wish it was more than 31%. I wish that was way out here. But it's still the case that senior management is a major barrier to delivering software quality at scale and at speed. And that shows up here. It shows up time and again. And I think that's a lesson that we need to keep learning and relearning, that until senior management gets on board, you might as well just be pushing a rock uphill. Okay, so specific recommendations coming from my report. Basically, use the quality standards that are emerging. Analyze and assess the quality of all third-party open source components to be included in any system. Monitor them closely in operation and apply patches, because there are lots of unpatched software systems that are sitting out there just waiting to be attacked. Avoid DevOps and CI/CD models that do not include continuous quality engineering, best practices and tools. A real good example of that, was the original Scrum model, which had none of this in there, and suffered accordingly. Integrate continuous technical debt remediation into your lifecycle. Highly recommend that. Invest in the professionalism, knowledge, and tooling of your software engineers. I think you would all pretty much agree with that. Okay. And you might even want to consider in your organizations having your key developers certified for our knowledge of the critical code and architectural weaknesses that are found in the ISO 5055 series. There will be a certification test available next year. I think I'm not exactly sure when during the year, but CISQ knows that better than I do. Okay, so let's do a little, in the last couple minutes, do some predictions. This is going to keep on happening. So the cost of poor software quality will continue to eat into our GDP and limit overall productivity. The labor shortage is exacerbated. The problems of cybercrime, open source software, technical debt will continue to grow. Okay, the critical problems that are emerging are in critical infrastructure, healthcare systems, what I call unsocial media technology, software supply chains, global cyber war attacks will escalate. Okay, and we could get on top of this, if organizations would adopt the recommendations that I put forward in my series of reports. But again, they have to become knowledgeable. So my wish list is that DevQualOps will overtake the use of DevOps. The smart tools that are being used by software engineers inside of organizations might find their way into the public market. The software quality engineering standards for the remaining four subfactors will find its way into the world. The MITRE, CWEs, and CVEs will become widely recognized and used in all IT development projects. And I hope that generative AI creates a useful programmer's assistant, because at this point, AI is trying to eat the world. Okay. All righty. So that's my last slide, and I'll open it up to Q&A at this point. Thanks for your time.